My son transferred all my money to his wife's account, but I already suspected it. The call came on a Wednesday morning, 3 days after I'd given my son Michael power of attorney over my finances. I was in the garden, tending to my roses, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another spam call trying to sell me extended car warranties or talk to me about my computer's virus. But something made me pick up. Call it intuition, call it fate, call it the universe trying to warn me before it was too late. Mrs. Alina Hartwell. The voice was professional, concerned, a woman's voice. Yes, this is Alina. Mrs. Hartwell, this is Jessica Chen from First National Bank. I'm calling regarding some unusual activity on your accounts. Do you have a moment to speak privately? My heart skipped a beat. Unusual activity? What kind of activity? Ma'am, are you aware that approximately $847,000 was transferred from your various accounts yesterday afternoon? The transfers were authorized by someone with power of attorney over your accounts, but given the amount and the speed of the transfers, our fraud department flagged it for review. The phone felt suddenly heavy in my hand. The morning sun seemed too bright. My roses blurred in front of me. $847,000. I repeated, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Yes, ma'am. Multiple transfers to an account belonging to a Mrs. Jessica Palmer. The transfers were completed yesterday between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. I need to verify that you authorized these transactions. Jessica Palmer, Michael's wife, my daughter-in-law of 3 years, the woman I'd never quite trusted, never quite warmed to despite my best efforts. I did not authorize those transfers, I said slowly, my mind racing. But my son has power of attorney. He must have made a mistake. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Hartwell, I need to be very clear with you. These weren't mistaken transfers. They were deliberate, systematic movements of funds from your savings accounts, investment accounts, and money market accounts. Everything except your checking account, which had the minimum balance required. Someone with your power of attorney documents transferred nearly your entire life savings to another person's account. I sat down heavily on my garden bench. 83 years old, and I'd thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I'd survived the death of my husband 20 years ago. I'd built a successful real estate business from nothing. I'd raised 3 children as a single mother after my husband's death. I'd weathered the 2008 financial crisis without losing my investments. But I hadn't survived my own son stealing from me. Except, had I suspected it, deep down had I known. Mrs. Hartwell, are you still there? Yes, I said quietly. Yes, I'm here. What do I do now? First, we need to file a fraud report. Second, I'd strongly recommend you contact the police. Third, we'll freeze all your remaining accounts immediately and revoke any power of attorney access. Can you come to the bank today? Yes, I'll be there within the hour. I hung up and sat there in my garden, surrounded by the roses I'd spent 30 years cultivating, in the house my husband and I had bought when we were newlyweds, and I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Fear. But beneath the fear was something else, something harder, colder. Because the truth was, I had suspected something. I'd suspected it for months. And I'd given Michael power of attorney anyway because I'd needed to know for sure. I'd needed to see how far he would go. And now I knew. The problems had started, as they so often do, with small things. Little inconsistencies that were easy to explain away if you wanted to believe the best in people. It was March when Michael first suggested I needed help managing my finances. I was 83 years old, still sharp as a tack, still managing my own investments, still balancing my checkbook every month like I'd done for 60 years. But Michael seemed to think I was becoming forgetful, confused, unable to handle my affairs. Mom, I'm worried about you, he'd said over Sunday dinner at my house. Jessica sat beside him, silent but watchful, picking at her salmon and barely meeting my eyes. Worried about what, dear? I'd asked, passing him the roasted potatoes. About you living alone in this big house. About you managing all your finances by yourself. What if something happened? What if you fell or got sick or, I don't know, got confused about your bills? I'm not confused about anything, I'd said mildly. I've been managing money since before you were born. I know, Mom, I know, but you're getting older. It's a lot of responsibility, a lot of accounts to keep track of. I could help you, make things easier. We could consolidate your accounts, set up automatic payments, maybe even look at moving you into one of those nice senior communities where you wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or... I'm not moving into a nursing home, Michael. It's not a nursing home. It's an active senior community. They have activities, social events, on-site medical care. You'd love it. I'd looked at my son, my eldest child, the one I'd worked 3 jobs to put through business school, the one who'd promised to always take care of me, and I'd seen something in his eyes that made me pause, something calculating. I'm perfectly happy where I am, I'd said firmly, and I'm perfectly capable of managing my own finances. Jessica had spoken up then, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. Of course you are, Alina. Michael just worries about you. We both do. It's because we love you. She'd smiled at me, and I'd smiled back, but we both knew what we were really saying to each other. She knew I didn't trust her, and I knew she was after something. The suggestions had continued over the following weeks. Maybe I should add Michael to my bank accounts, just in case of emergency. Maybe I should make him a beneficiary on my investment accounts to avoid probate when I died. Maybe I should give him power of attorney just to make things simpler. I'd said no every time, politely but firmly, no. Then came the incident with my checkbook. I'd been at Michael's house for dinner. Jessica had made her famous lasagna, which I suspected came from Costco, but I'd never said so, and I'd left my purse on their hall table while we ate. When I'd gotten home, I'd noticed my checkbook was in a different pocket than where I always kept it. Small thing, easy to dismiss. Maybe I'd moved it myself and forgotten. But then I'd checked my bank statement and found a check I hadn't written. $5,000 made out to cash, signed with a signature that looked almost exactly like mine, but not quite. I'd called Michael immediately. Mom, are you sure you didn't write it? Maybe you forgot. I don't forget $5,000 checks, Michael. Well, it's got your signature on it. The bank wouldn't have cashed it if the signature didn't match. The signature is forged. Someone practiced my signature and forged this check. There was a pause. Then, Mom, are you accusing me of something? I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm stating facts. Someone forged a check on my account for $5,000. Maybe it was identity theft. Maybe someone stole your checkbook. You should be more careful, Mom. You're getting to an age where people target the elderly for scams like this. The elderly? As if I were some doddering old fool who left my checkbook lying around for thieves to find. As if I hadn't noticed that the only time my checkbook had been out of my sight was at his house, on his hall table, while we ate his wife's Costco lasagna. I'd reported the check to the bank. They'd investigated. They'd told me the signature was close enough that they couldn't definitively call it fraud. They'd suggested I be more careful with my checkbook in the future. I'd said nothing more to Michael about it, but I'd started paying attention, really paying attention. I hired Diane Martinez in April. She was a private investigator I'd found through an old business associate, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded me of myself 30 years ago. What exactly do you need me to investigate, Mrs. Hartwell? She'd asked in our first meeting at a coffee shop downtown. My son and his wife. I think they're planning to steal from me. Diane hadn't even blinked. Tell me everything. I'd told her about the power of attorney suggestions, about the forged check, about Jessica's watchful silences and Michael's sudden concern for my failing mental health, about how they'd been pushing me to sell my house, consolidate my accounts, make things simpler. How much money are we talking about? Diane had asked. Approximately $850,000 in liquid assets, plus this house, which is worth about $600,000, plus some stocks and bonds, maybe another $200,000. My late husband left me well provided for, and I've been careful with money my whole life. Diane had let out a low whistle. That's a lot of motive. What do you want me to find out? I want to know if they're in financial trouble. I want to know if this is about debt or greed or something else. I want to know what they're planning so I can stop them. And if they're not planning anything, if you're wrong. I'd looked at her steadily. Then I'll apologize to my son and sleep better at night, but I'm not wrong. Diane had investigated for 3 weeks. What she found was damning. Michael and Jessica were drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out to the tune of $120,000. A second mortgage on their house they'd taken out 2 years ago and were already behind on payments. Car loans they could barely afford. And most damningly, a series of failed business investments. Michael had been trying to become a day trader, convinced he could get rich quick, and had lost over $200,000 of their own money in the past year alone. They needed money desperately. And there I was, his elderly mother, sitting on nearly $1 million in liquid assets. There's more, Diane had said, sliding a folder across the table. Jessica's been researching elder care facilities, but not nice ones. The cheapest nursing homes in the state, the kind where they warehouse people. And she's been looking into guardianship laws, how to have someone declared incompetent so you can take over their affairs. I'd felt cold reading through the documents. My son and his wife weren't just planning to steal from me. They were planning to have me declared incompetent, locked away in some horrible facility, and drain every penny I had while I was powerless to stop them. What do you want to do? Diane had asked. I'd thought about it for a long moment. I could confront them. I could cut them off. I could change my will, warn them away, protect myself. Or I could set a trap. I'm going to give them what they want, I'd said slowly. I'm going to give Michael power of attorney over my finances. Mrs. Hartwell, I strongly advise against. I'm going to give it to him, I'd continued, and then I'm going to watch what he does with it. If he's innocent, if I'm wrong about all of this, then nothing will happen and I'll know I was being paranoid. But if I'm right. If you're right, they'll clean you out. If I'm right, they'll commit a crime. A documentable, prosecutable crime. And then I'll have them exactly where I want them. Diane had looked at me with something like respect. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm 83 years old. I don't have time for safe games anymore. I'd called Michael the next day and told him I'd been thinking about his suggestion. That maybe he was right. Maybe I was getting too old to manage everything myself. That I'd like his help after all. The relief in his voice had been palpable. Really, Mom? Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you're finally seeing sense about this. Finally seeing sense. As if I were the one who'd been unreasonable. We'd met at my lawyer's office the following week. Robert Chen had been my attorney for 30 years, and I'd called him privately before the meeting to explain what I was doing. Alina, this is incredibly risky, he'd said. If you're right about Michael, you could lose everything. That's why I need you to help me protect myself. I want to set up a separate account they don't know about. Transfer most of my money there before I sign the power of attorney. Leave just enough in the other accounts to make them think they're getting everything. You want to set up a dummy account as bait. Exactly. Can you do it? Robert had been quiet for a moment. Then, yes, I can do that. But Alina, what about your other children? Have you told Jennifer and Thomas about any of this? Jennifer and Thomas, my other 2 children. Jennifer lived in Seattle with her husband and 2 kids, running a successful pediatric practice. Thomas was in Boston, teaching literature at Harvard. Both of them called regularly, visited when they could, asked nothing from me except my time and love. I haven't told them, I'd said. This is between Michael and me. If I'm wrong, there's no point worrying them. And if I'm right, then they'll find out soon enough. So Robert had helped me set up the trap. We'd created a new account at a different bank, one Michael didn't know about. We transferred $750,000 into it, the bulk of my savings, investments, everything that mattered. We'd left $850,000 in my existing accounts, spread across savings, checking, money markets, and investments. It sounds like a lot of money. It was. But that $850,000 included the value of stocks I couldn't easily liquidate without raising suspicion, CDs that hadn't matured yet, and accounts that would trigger penalties if closed early. It was real money, but it wasn't everything. The real fortune was safe in the account Michael didn't know existed. Then I'd gone to the meeting with Michael and Jessica, sat in Robert's office, and signed the power of attorney documents. This gives Michael full authority to manage your accounts, pay your bills, make financial decisions on your behalf, Robert had explained, his face professionally neutral. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want, Alina? I'd looked at Michael, my firstborn son, and seen the eager anticipation in his eyes. I'd looked at Jessica, sitting beside him with her hands folded in her lap, and seen the ghost of a smile on her lips. I'm certain, I'd said and signed my name. Michael had hugged me afterward, actually hugged me, something he hadn't done in years. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for trusting me. I promise I'll take good care of everything. You won't have to worry about a thing. I know you will, dear, I'd said, patting his back and thinking about what Diane had found. The debt, the desperation, the research into having me declared incompetent. I'd given him enough rope. Now I just had to wait and see if he'd hang himself with it. The first week after signing the power of attorney, nothing happened. Michael called to check on me, asked if I needed anything, suggested again that I think about selling the house and moving somewhere, easier to manage. I demurred, said I'd think about it and waited. The second week, I noticed some small transactions, bills being paid automatically, exactly as Michael had promised. Everything seemed normal, legitimate. But I'd set up alerts on all my accounts, notifications that would tell me every time money moved. And I'd given Diane Martinez access to monitor everything too, just in case something happened to me before I could act. They're testing the waters, Diane had said when I'd called to report the small transactions. Seeing if you'll notice, seeing if you'll object. And when I don't, then they'll get bolder. She was right. The third week, I got a notification that $5,000 had been transferred from my savings to my checking account. Nothing alarming. I'd asked Michael to do something similar before to cover some expenses, but I hadn't asked this time. When I'd called to ask about it, Michael had been smooth as silk. Oh, Mom, I was just moving some money around to optimize your interest rates. You had too much sitting in checking earning nothing. I shifted things to get you better returns. I see. Thank you for thinking of that. Of course. That's what I'm here for, to make sure your money is working for you. Working for me, or working for him. The fourth week, larger movements started. $20,000 transferred from an investment account to checking. $15,000 moved from a money market to savings. On paper, it all looked legitimate, like someone managing accounts efficiently. But I knew what he was doing. He was slowly consolidating everything, moving money from accounts that were harder to access into accounts where he could transfer funds more easily. He was preparing for the big move. I'd called Diane. It's starting. Are you ready? As ready as I'll ever be. Alina, once they transfer the money out, there's no guarantee you'll get it back. Even if you press charges, even if they're convicted, the money might be gone. Spent. Hidden. Are you prepared for that? I'd thought about the $750,000 sitting safely in my secret account, the account Michael didn't know about. I'd thought about my house, my other assets, the insurance policies and investments that weren't included in the power of attorney. I'll be fine, I'd said. I have enough. This isn't about the money anymore. Then what is it about? Justice, and teaching my son a lesson about what happens when you betray the people who love you. It was a Tuesday when Michael made his move. I was in my garden again. I spent a lot of time in my garden those days, finding peace among the roses while I waited for my son to prove me right or wrong, when the first notification came through. Transfer authorized. $150,000 from savings account to external account. 5 minutes later, transfer authorized. $200,000 from investment account to external account. 10 minutes after that, transfer authorized. $175,000 from money market account to external account. He was cleaning me out, systematically and quickly, exactly as I'd predicted. My phone kept buzzing with notifications, each one another nail in the coffin of our relationship. I sat there among my roses and watched my accounts drain away, and I felt nothing but a cold, hard satisfaction. I'd been right, I'd known, and now I had proof. When the transfers finally stopped, I checked the balances. He'd left exactly $2,347 in my checking account, enough to cover my mortgage payment and utilities for the month, enough that I wouldn't immediately notice I'd been robbed if I wasn't paying attention. He thought he'd been clever. He thought he'd gotten away with it. He had no idea what was coming. I called Diane first. It's done, he took it all. How much? $847,000. Transferred it all to an account belonging to Jessica Palmer. Smart, putting it in his wife's name so he can claim he had nothing to do with it. Not smart enough. I have the power of attorney documents with his signature. I have the transfer authorizations. I have everything I need. What do you want to do first? Call the bank, then call Robert, then... I paused, thinking about my other 2 children, about how this would affect them, about the scandal and shame that was about to rain down on our family. Then I called Jennifer and Thomas. They deserve to know what their brother has done. The next hour was a blur of phone calls. The bank was appalled, immediately froze my remaining accounts and flagged everything for fraud review. Robert was grimly satisfied that the trap had worked, but concerned about the legal battle ahead. And Jennifer and Thomas. Jennifer had cried, actually cried. Mom, no, Michael wouldn't, he couldn't. He did, sweetheart, I'm sorry. Thomas had been quietly furious. That son of a bitch. After everything you did for him, after you put him through school, helped him start his business, gave him money when his investments failed the first time. This is how he repays you. You knew about the failed investments, I'd asked. Mom, everyone knew except you. Michael's been in debt for years, we thought. We hoped he'd figure it out, get his act together. We never thought he'd steal from his own mother. Well, now we know what kind of man he really is. There was a pause. Then Jennifer asked the question I'd been dreading. Mom, are you going to be okay? Financially, I mean, did he take everything? I'll be fine, I'd assured her. I have enough to live on, don't worry about me. I didn't tell them about the secret account. Not yet. That was insurance, protection, and leverage all rolled into one. The fewer people who knew about it, the better. After the phone calls, I sat in my living room and waited, because I knew what would come next. I knew Michael would realize the bank had frozen the accounts. I knew he'd panic. I knew he'd call. The phone rang at 6:47 p.m. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Hello, dear. Mom, his voice was tight, strained. Mom, there's been a problem with your accounts. The bank froze everything. They're saying there was suspicious activity. I tried to explain that I have power of attorney, that I was just managing your money like you asked me to, but they won't listen. Can you call them? Can you tell them it's okay? Suspicious activity. I let my voice sound confused, elderly. What kind of suspicious activity? The transfers I made yesterday, to consolidate your accounts, remember? I told you I was going to do that. You said it was fine. I don't remember that conversation, Michael. A pause, a long, dangerous pause. Mom, you must remember I called you Tuesday morning. I explained exactly what I was doing. You gave me permission. Did I? I'm sorry, dear, I don't recall. Maybe you should come over. We can sort this out together. The bank wants to file a fraud report, Mom. They're talking about involving the police. You need to call them right now and tell them I had your permission. You need to fix this. There it was. The demand. The expectation that I'd cover for him, protect him, save him from the consequences of his own actions like I'd done his whole life. I'm afraid I can't do that, Michael. What? I can't tell them you had my permission, because you didn't. You stole from me. You transferred $847,000 of my money to your wife's account without my knowledge or consent. Silence. Then, you knew what I was doing. I suspected, so I set a trap. I gave you power of attorney and waited to see what you'd do with it. And you did exactly what I expected. You stole from me. I didn't steal. His voice rose, panicked now. I was managing your money. That's what power of attorney means. I was protecting your assets, making sure they were safe. Safe in Jessica's bank account. It's complicated, Mom. There are tax advantages to certain account structures. I was trying to minimize your tax liability. By putting my money in your wife's name. Try again, Michael. Mom, please. His voice cracked. Please, if you report this, I'll go to jail. Jessica will leave me. I'll lose everything. I'm your son, your firstborn. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I closed my eyes, thought about the little boy he used to be. The child I'd rocked to sleep, nursed through illnesses, cheered for at baseball games. The son I'd loved unconditionally, protected fiercely, sacrificed for endlessly. Where had that boy gone? When had he become this man, willing to steal from his own mother, willing to leave her destitute in her old age? It means you should have thought about that before you robbed me, I said quietly. The bank has already filed a fraud report. The police will be investigating. And Michael, I'm pressing charges. You can't do this. You're my mother. And you're my son, which makes what you did even worse. I hung up before he could say anything else. The police came the next morning. 2 detectives, a man and a woman, both professional and sympathetic. I gave them copies of everything: the power of attorney documents, the transfer records, the documentation of Michael's debt that Diane had compiled. Mrs. Hartwell, I have to ask, the female detective said gently. Why did you give him power of attorney if you suspected he might steal from you? Because suspecting and knowing are 2 different things. I needed proof, and now I have it. You set him up. I gave him a choice. He made the wrong one. They'd looked at each other, something passing between them that I couldn't read. Then the male detective had said, That's going to make the prosecution more complicated. His defense will argue that you enticed him, that this was entrapment. It wasn't entrapment. He had legitimate access to my accounts. He chose to abuse that access. No one forced him to transfer my money to his wife's account. They'll also argue that you're elderly, possibly confused, possibly vindictive. That this is a family dispute, not a criminal matter. I'd looked at him steadily. Detective, I'm 83 years old. I ran my own real estate business for 40 years. I manage a portfolio worth over $1 million. I am neither confused nor senile. And my son stole nearly $1 million from me. That's not a family dispute. That's a felony. The investigation moved quickly. Jessica tried to claim she knew nothing about the money, that Michael must have transferred it without her knowledge. But bank records showed she'd accessed the account within hours of the transfers, had even made several purchases with a debit card linked to the account. She'd bought expensive handbags, jewelry, a laptop. She'd known exactly where the money came from. Michael tried 3 different stories. First, that he'd had my permission. Then, when that didn't work, that he'd been planning to invest the money and return it with interest. Finally, when both of those fell apart, he claimed he'd been under duress from Jessica, that she'd pressured him to do it. The prosecutor wasn't impressed with any of his explanations. Mrs. Hartwell, I want you to understand something, she'd told me in our pretrial meeting. Even if we win this case, even if your son is convicted, you might not get all your money back. A lot of it's already been spent. Jessica made some large purchases. They paid off some of their debts. We'll try to recover what we can, but... I understand, I'd said. That's not why I'm doing this. Then why are you? I'd thought about that question for a long time. Why was I doing this? Why was I putting my own son in prison, destroying his life, tearing apart my family? Because some lines can't be crossed without consequences, I'd finally said. Because if I don't stand up for myself now, at 83 years old, then what was the point of spending my whole life being strong? And because my son needs to learn that you can't steal from the people who love you and expect them to just forgive and forget. The prosecutor had nodded slowly. A lot of victims in elder financial abuse cases don't press charges. They're embarrassed, or they still love their family members, or they're afraid of being alone. It takes courage to do what you're doing. Or stubbornness, I'd said with a slight smile. I've been accused of that too. The trial was set for 6 months later. In the meantime, I had to navigate the wreckage of my family. Jennifer flew in from Seattle and stayed with me for a week. We talked late into the night, processing what Michael had done, trying to understand how we'd missed the warning signs. I knew he was in debt, Jennifer had said, curled up on my couch with a glass of wine. But I thought it was normal debt, you know. Mortgage, car payments, credit cards. I didn't know it was this bad. Did you ever loan him money? She'd looked away, guilty. Once, about 3 years ago. He said he needed $10,000 for a business investment, something that couldn't miss. Promised he'd pay me back in 6 months. Did he? No, when I asked about it, he said the investment had fallen through, he'd lost the money. I felt bad for him, so I told him to forget about paying me back, that it was a gift, not a loan. How generous of you, I'd said dryly. How much do you want to bet that investment was a lie and he used your money to pay off his credit cards? She'd started crying then. I'm so stupid. I should have seen what he was doing. I should have warned you. You're not stupid. You're his sister. You wanted to believe the best of him. We all did. Thomas had called every day but couldn't visit. He was in the middle of the semester and couldn't leave his classes. But he'd been vocal about his support. I hope he goes to prison, he'd said bluntly. I hope they throw the book at him. What he did was unforgivable. He's your brother. He was my brother. Now he's just a thief who happens to share my DNA. I'd been startled by the venom in his voice. Thomas had always been the peacemaker of the family, the one who smoothed over conflicts and kept everyone connected. To hear him so angry, so unforgiving, brought home just how badly Michael had damaged our family. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more sterile. Fluorescent lights, industrial carpet, wooden benches worn smooth by thousands of bodies over the years. Michael sat at the defense table with his lawyer, a slick young man named Preston who wore expensive suits and had the kind of smile that made me want to count my fingers after shaking his hand. Jessica wasn't charged. The prosecutor had said there wasn't enough evidence to prove she'd been complicit in the initial theft, though they were still investigating whether she could be charged with receiving stolen property. She sat in the gallery behind Michael, her face carefully neutral, dressed conservatively in a navy suit. Playing the supportive wife, the innocent bystander caught up in circumstances beyond her control. I sat in the front row of the prosecution side, flanked by Jennifer and Thomas, who'd both taken time off work to be there. Jennifer kept squeezing my hand. Thomas sat rigid, his jaw clenched, staring at the back of Michael's head with barely concealed fury. The prosecutor was a woman named Amanda Richardson, maybe 45, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd told me she specialized in elder financial abuse cases, that she'd seen dozens of situations like mine. Though I have to say, she'd added, I've never seen a victim set such an elaborate trap before. The judge was an older man named Harrison, with gray hair and a face that had seen too many family tragedies play out in his courtroom. He looked tired as he called the court to order. Amanda stood for her opening statement. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case about betrayal. About a son who stole nearly $1 million from his elderly mother. About a man who obtained power of attorney under the guise of helping his mother manage her finances, then systematically transferred her life savings to his wife's bank account. The evidence will show that the defendant, Michael Hartwell, committed financial elder abuse, theft, and fraud. The evidence will show that he did this deliberately, methodically, and without remorse. And the evidence will show that he did this to his own mother. She paused, letting that sink in. The jury, 7 women, 5 men, ranging in age from mid-20s to 70s, looked appropriately horrified. The defense will try to tell you that this was a misunderstanding, that Michael Hartwell was simply managing his mother's finances, as she'd asked him to, that the transfers were legitimate financial management. But the evidence will prove otherwise. The evidence will show you bank records demonstrating the systematic liquidation of Alina Hartwell's accounts. It will show you that the money was transferred to his wife's personal account, not to any legitimate investment or financial vehicle. And it will show you that, when Mrs. Hartwell discovered what he'd done, Michael Hartwell tried to convince her she'd authorized the transfers, attempted to gaslight her into believing her own memory was failing. Amanda walked back to her table, picked up a document, held it up for the jury to see. This is Alina Hartwell's bank statement from the day before she gave her son power of attorney. Her accounts totaled $850,329. This, she held up another document, is her bank statement 2 weeks later, after Michael Hartwell had finished transferring her money. Her accounts totaled $2,347. In 2 weeks, Michael Hartwell stole $847,982 from his mother. And that's not financial management. That's theft. She sat down. It was a strong opening, exactly what I'd hoped for. Preston stood for the defense's opening statement, and I braced myself. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, this is indeed a case about family. But it's not the straightforward tale of betrayal the prosecution wants you to believe. This is a case about a son trying to help his aging mother.